From Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Siddiqui. First, the headlines. Israeli soldiers attack Al-Aqsa, clear out Muslims for settlers. COVID killed nearly 15 million people globally, not 5 million, WHO. Climate change, a growing population force 4 countries to move capital cities. UK aid cuts leave 40,000 Syrian children out of school. Asylum seekers continue to flock to the U.S. Our top story tonight. On Thursday, dozens of Palestinians were injured after Israeli police fired rubber bullets at them and detained 51 Muslims at Al-Aqsa Mosque. Israeli police were guarding nearly 800 Israeli settlers who stormed the mosque courtyard and occupied East Jerusalem throughout the day. The settlers were observing the anniversary of Israel's foundation. Israeli settlement groups have called for a large-scale incursion into Al-Aqsa Mosque, the world's third holiest site for Muslims. Jews call the area the Temple Mount, claiming it was the site of 2 ancient Jewish temples. A video clip circulating on social media shows Israeli police holding an Algerian citizen outside the mosque after they removed her headscarf. Police claim dozens of people shouted incitement calls and threw stones at them, injuring a policeman. The COVID-19 pandemic's death toll between January 1, 2020 and December 31, 2021 was roughly 14.9 million, according to a new World Health Organization study. Excess mortality is calculated as the difference between the number of deaths and the number that would be expected in the absence of the pandemic. It includes deaths associated directly with COVID-19 or indirectly due to the pandemic's impact on health systems and society. Deaths linked indirectly to COVID are attributable to other health conditions that could have resulted from people being unable to access prevention and treatment due to systems overburdened by the pandemic. Over 80% of the excess deaths are concentrated in Southeast Asia, Europe, and the Americas. Increasing population, climate change, and natural conditions have prompted 4 countries and a territory to move their capitals. They are South Korea, Indonesia, Egypt, Equatorial Guinea, and the British Overseas Territory of Montserrat. Only Montserrat's capital is a ghost town today, according to data compiled by Andalu Agency. The capitals of the 4 countries are home to a significant part of their total populations, data show. In the past, Kazakhstan, Pakistan, Brazil, Malaysia, Nigeria, and Burma have changed their capitals for political reasons. But in the last 50 years, natural events, climate, economic reasons, and population growth have led to changes in capital cities. In April, Hindu processions celebrating Navratri and Hanuman Jayanti became flashpoints for communal violence across India. Hindu supremacist groups organized processions in which Islamophobic songs were played near mosques, sparking clashes. Muslim residents in some areas said participants of those processions tried to enter religious buildings to plant saffron flags. In some places, Muslim religious structures were vandalized or set on fire. Where the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party controls the state or local administration, the violence was followed by anti-encroachment drives. Shops and homes, mostly belonging to Muslims, were knocked down by bulldozers. Many mosques say they have CCTVs and footage of the violence directed at them, but they point out this is no help if the police do not investigate the cases. Starting next year, a Turkish cruise company will start Umrah pilgrimage voyages from Istanbul to Mecca, a company official said. iCruise CEO Suten Ay told Andalu Agency Umrah ship journeys will start by 2023. Ay said his company has been developing this project for a year and a half. He said Turkey has serious cruise ship tourism potential. Ay's cruise voyage is expected to take 7 days from Istanbul. Those who have fulfilled their Umrah or Hajj pilgrimage can either return to Istanbul or continue on to other countries, Ay said. Umrah is a voluntary pilgrimage to Mecca that Muslims can perform at any time of the year. School for more than 40,000 Syrian children has been disrupted due to British aid cuts, according to Syria Relief and its parent charity Action for Humanity. This could lead to a rise in children being forced into labor, marriage, early pregnancies, conscription into military and armed groups, exploitation, and child trafficking, warned Jessica Adams, Syria Relief's head of communications. British financial support to 133 schools run by the charity ended April 30th. The British government announced $5.2 billion in spending cuts in March. Syria was the country most affected, with 69% of its aid slashed. International aid cuts, including those from Britain and the U.S., are leading to a health crisis in northwest Syria, Amnesty International said. Chinese authorities allegedly paid Uyghur Muslim men to dance outside a famous mosque in the northwestern Xinjiang region to celebrate the end of Ramadan. The performance was filmed and released by state media ahead of an anticipated visit by the United Nations Human Rights Chief later this month. Kashgar locals said people were not allowed to pray at Eidgah Mosque, but were forced to dance on Eid al-Fitr on May 3rd. A YouTube video posted by China News Service Tuesday shows Chinese tourists observing the dancing and taking photos in the square. A city police officer said prayers have not been allowed at the Eidgah Mosque since 2016. Details on asylum seekers and refugees moving to the U.S. after this break, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Imam Malik Mujahid in Chicago. Just like you, I was moved by that Allahu Akbar lady. She stood her ground, fearful of none, for her hijab and for her education. Sisters and brothers, Indian Muslims are facing a genocide. India does not care for Muslim protesting, but it does care for the world opinion. Therefore, we must push the United Nations. The UN has a responsibility to protect. They must prevent genocide. Please sign this UN petition now. Get others to sign. It will help. Trust me, it will help. We need 1 million signatures, brothers and sisters. Please sign now.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Assalamu alaikum! Open up your eyes.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Bika from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppets stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
Adam's World. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah. Let's explore.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
Asylum seekers and refugees crossing the border in Arizona continue to flock to the United States. Many of those migrants sometimes come from the nation's southern border. Those who cross the Colorado River and reach the border are sent to temporary facilities after processing. Asylum seekers, refugees, and irregular migrants from Colombia, Cuba, Haiti, Ghana, India, El Salvador, Jamaica, and many other countries immigrate to the U.S. Rights advocates have been warning the U.S. Supreme Court's expected overruling of Roe v. Wade could result in rollbacks of numerous other rights. A case in point, Texas's Republican Governor Greg Abbott now wants to challenge a 40-year-old ruling affirming that states must offer free public education to all children. Abbott was discussing border security in an interview with right-wing radio host Joe Pagliarulo late Wednesday. He agreed with the host's claim that children of undocumented immigrants place a real burden on communities when they attend public schools. The 1982 Plyler versus Doe ruling requires states to educate undocumented immigrants. On Monday, an Oklahoma judge ruled that a lawsuit brought by 3 survivors of the 1921 Tulsa race massacre may proceed. Judge Caroline Wall dismissed part of the plaintiff's public nuisance claim. Through the lawsuit, survivors are seeking reparations for harm caused by the massacre. The plaintiffs are Leslie Benningfield Randall, age 107, Viola Fletcher, also age 107, and Hugh Van Ellis, age 101. The defendants are the city of Tulsa, Tulsa County, Tulsa Regional Chamber, and others blamed for the massacre. The judge granted only part of the defendant's motion and denied dismissing the lawsuit. Demario Solomon Simmons, a lawyer for the survivors, said history was made today after the judge's ruling. Oregon police are seeking a man who they say was caught on camera trying to burn down the Muslim community center of Portland earlier this week. Crime Stoppers of Oregon is offering a $2,500 reward to anyone with information that could lead to the perpetrator's arrest. Surveillance cameras captured a man pouring a substance on the building and setting it on fire around 7 p.m. Tuesday, police said. Police said there was only minor damage to the structure. In another case, Crime Stoppers is offering an award for information on a synagogue being vandalized earlier this week as well. Portland police and fire officials are investigating the case as a possible bias crime. The Dallas Museum of Art will host the exhibition Cartier and Islamic Art in Search of Modernity, May 14th through September 18th. Louis Cartier, who died in 1942, was a jeweler of European royal houses and American billionaires. It's the only North American venue for the exhibit, which traces Cartier's inspirations from Islamic art and design. The exhibit includes Cartier's collection of Persian and Indian art and the works of Cartier designers from the early 20th century to present day. It compiles more than 400 pieces from Cartier, the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, the Musée du Louvre, the Kier collection of Islamic art, and other international collections. It explores how Cartier's designers adapted forms and techniques from Islamic art, architecture, and jewelry, as well as materials from India, Iran, and Arab lands. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Imam Malik Mujahid. Brothers and sisters, we all watch the Allahu Akbar lady from India. She's amazing, isn't she? She's neither compromising her hijab nor her education. She's standing tall. We must stand with her. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect her. But it is not just hijab, brothers and sisters. Indian Muslims are facing genocide.
Genocide that we face in India is not a new phenomenon. India has had several genocides.
They are attacked every day. Even the Indian government admits there has been more than 1,800 organized attacks on Muslims, but they call it riot. 660 people are hanged to death in India, lynched in broad daylight, sometimes just because they were accused of eating beef. Yes, accusation of eating beef can kill a human being in India. We cannot remain silent, can we? Alhamdulillah, OIC has spoken, that is good, but why in the World United Nations is silent? The UN has a responsibility to protect. It has a duty to prevent genocide. Sisters and brothers, we must stand with Indian Muslims and other minorities. We are free, they are not. We are not attacked, they are under attack day and night. Let's do our job. I have signed this UN petition. I ask you to sign it now. Thank you so much.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse, walk a mile in my shoes.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
Welcome back. Now for our in-depth analysis segment. Let's watch.
More than 1 million Ukrainians have fled to Europe. And United Nations this morning is saying that the number could rise to 10 millions, 4 million to different parts of Europe and 6 million within Ukraine. So war is going on. So what the world is doing? It seems like small arms are being provided by different NATO countries to Ukraine to defend themselves against the Russian invasion. But more or less, it is limited to sanctions and more sanctions and counter sanctions by Russia. Do sanctions really work? Can they bring peace? We have some question, and someone who dwells on these issues, a professor emeritus of the peace studies at the Grant Institute of International Peace Studies, George Lopez, is with us. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be with you today.
So, Professor, it is interesting to see there is someone who is a professor of peace studies in our country.
Well, thank you. We've been very fortunate at the Kroc Institute at Notre Dame to have generous benefactors believe that it's important to invest in research and teaching in peace. And since we opened in 1986, we have over 4,000 graduates of our program at the master's and undergraduate level, including dozens in Ukraine and Russia who we've been in touch with about this terrible tragedy.
So are there people, some of your graduates are trying to achieve peace at this moment? Because it seems like war and people supporting Ukraine with the arms and things like that. We thought United Nations, where Russia and America both are there, is an instrument of peace.
Not this time around, it seems. Unfortunate organization of the Security Council, which gives the veto to a single power when all the rest are willing to go along with the condemnation of illegal violations of borders, prevents UN Security Council action, at least at that council level. I think it's instructive that the council did mobilize one of the few rubrics that doesn't demand full agreement of the P5 and voted to move the debate and the discussion in international law terms to the General Assembly. So on Wednesday, the General Assembly passed a resolution with 141 nations condemning Russian actions and demanding an immediate withdrawal from Ukraine. And that was a very strong action. The Secretary General has been strong about this. There are ways in which the Security Council still suffers from the design of 1945. But there are elements here that might bring peace after we can stop the fighting.
So, Professor Lopez, sanctions, pretty quickly, people are just piling up sanctions after sanctions. Do you think they will bring peace?
Well, my own hope originally weeks ago was that by being transparent in the side of the Western countries with the kinds of measures that we be imposed on Russia's leadership, its oligarchs, and its economy, that a kind of more rational choice might have been made by Mr. Putin in seeing that there might be ways to work out your concerns about Ukraine, however manufactured they may be on your side, to forego this kind of military confrontation and the economic repercussions it would have due to the sanctions. But he went ahead anyway, thinking that maybe the West wasn't as united as it has turned out to be, and thinking that they had ways in which they have evaded the worst impact of sanctions before, and he could forestall the worst of this. I think sanctions have moved from the possibility of deterring us from war and preserving peace for a while to now being the economic equivalent of making war on Russia and a way to eventually get a ceasefire. But sanctions are clearly right now in a punishment mode, not in a let us bring peace mode. I think there's some hope that the sanctions will be so immediately clear and devastating that the Russian leadership might agree to a ceasefire. But I also believe that the devastation we're seeing and the loss on both sides, most of it unanticipated on the Russian side, now create a determination in the Russian leadership that they're going to forge ahead, they're going to take over Ukraine, and then they'll worry about talk and sanctions implications later.
So, sanctions were substantial, almost complete on Iran and North Korea. But those nations survive and thrive under the sanctions. So do you think this sanction will make Russia more isolated, more self-reliant, and more arrogant?
Well, I hope not the latter, but I do think that the cases that you've mentioned are very significant in comparison to this. One of the things that makes sanctions work at its best is when the country that's being sanctioned is highly economically interdependent and integrated with the sanctioners. In North Korea, that's never been the case. North Korea already was isolated economically, and while we could control or aim to control through sanctions the export of coal, the various importation of petroleum goods, and various other things, we were always sort of nipping at the edges of actually impacting North Korea economically. What we had wanted to do was to prevent the importation of goods and other things that help them build up missiles or the nuclear weapons. Those sanctions have failed. In the case of Iran, I'd make the case that sanctions were misused in a number of ways, but even with the misuse of sanctions and the maximum pressure that pulled the United States out of the JCPOA, we're weeks away from the restoration of that agreement. In terms of the economic impact on Iran, I think most middle class and working class people in Iran did get negatively impacted in ways that the sanctions were not originally meant to do. I think anytime you have a country that has a large single export product, there's going to be ways in which the sanctions will impact negatively until they can find ways to have new purchasers of their good. And this is why the Russians and the Chinese especially were able to help Iran evade the sanctions. And these were sanctions with a big leakage. The full story is yet to be written, I think, in that case. But Russia is the case that proves the rule because of the 3,000 American companies that operate in Russia, because of its substantial trade across the board in imports and exports with the West and the United States, because of the travel of Russians back and forth to the West, because the country as a centralized run economy from the top down has lots of exposure internationally in its financial assets and its sovereign debts. When you start closing down those bank accounts and changing the access of Russian banks to interact, to finance the goods that are now also embargoed, you take a big bite of an economy pretty clearly. The fall in the value of the ruble, the inflation in the country, the movement of the reserve rate for borrowing from 5% to 20% in 1 week, the closing of the Russian stock exchange, all of that we've seen only in the first 10 days of these sanctions. The implications for this down the road are pretty serious. And the personal has become political, and the political, by being an oligarch, has now gone personal because the West is seizing luxury goods that they feel are ill-derived benefits of the corruption and the robbing by oligarchs of monies that should be in the state treasury and working for the country's benefit.
You know, scholars have theorized that if there is more trade, more business, it can help modify the behavior of the communist regime or post-communist regime or authoritarian regimes like Russia and China. Do you think that theory is facing some challenge at this moment?
Yeah, and I think the challenges began even in tensions between China and the West over the last few years. I do believe that the international research findings that say the greater the trading partners, the greater the interdependence, the greater the likelihood of peace, because when you attack a trading partner, in a sense, you're attacking yourself. That's also what makes sanctions so likely to be successful across interdependent economies. So there's much peace that's generated by increased cooperation and trade. The European continent of the last half of the 20th century shows that in comparison to its centuries before, when you went to a common market, when we have a Gulf Cooperative Council, when we have a Latin American Free Trade Association, all the old rivalries fade away and cooperation seems to rule the day. And there are ways in which Russia could have retained cooperation if it sought a diplomatic settlement to its worries about Ukraine. But when a dictatorial leader with massive state power chooses to go ahead and realize their ambitions under maybe some illusions about how his own country is so strong it can hold back the effect of the sanctions, then you have the situation we have here now.
Professor Lopez, is something related, but not quite. I mean, let me ask you about this. You know, while there is a huge amount of support for Ukraine, troubling news is coming out when African Union is condemning Ukraine, not allowing blacks to go out. Now reports are coming out about the Asians. So is it connected with the overall rise of white nationalism in Europe? Or is it something unique? A unique possibility comes to mind because, you know, Russia is accusing Ukraine of having neo-Nazis. Now it is confirmed that neo-Nazi militias are part of their army, although the president himself is a Jew. So what is the complexity regarding this race tension, which seems to have emerged as a substantial news in the last couple of days?
Yeah, I think it arose at the start as you had so many non-Ukrainian international students studying in Ukrainian universities and approaching the borders, whether it was students from India or Ethiopia or Egypt. There were initial difficulties at the Polish border, but they were corrected within 48 hours. What do they reflect? They reflect cultural prejudices that don't change overnight. It reflects much of what we saw in some sections of Europe in a resistance to Syrian refugees years ago. I think there is always a racial cultural element in a number of dynamics. But the word complexity that you use is so important because no society is homogeneous. No society that's a modern educating and travel society like Ukraine is both in Ukrainians and the people they invite in to study is going to produce a homogeneous kind of approach. But I think the adaptation and the attempt to get to our better universal values is prevailing in this case. And no migrant coming from Ukraine seems to be being stopped at the border now.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Lopez, for your time. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Glad to see you.
That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.